It's like, oh, I'm talking about the interwar periods. Oh, interwar periods. That's when your grandfather got his gun.
In today's episode, we walk with a voice that refuses to shrink and stand in the heat of what it means to remember out loud. So, settle in. The story begins.
This is my story.
My father. My father told me stories slow.
So, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's
Rita.
such an honor.
Yeah, such an honor. Maybe you can begin by introducing yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm Maria Rita, and well, I'm currently a teacher at Escola Americana do Rio de Janeiro. I was born in São Paulo, the city of São Paulo. Studied, but came really early as a baby to Rio. So part of myself is a carioca, though I still have roots there in São Paulo.
That's nice.
And I studied here, went to school here, and studied anthropology in my undergraduate degree.
And Sao Paulo is such a big city, yeah?
It
I've
is.
not been there yet, so...
It's very cool. Very different from Rio, but
okay.
yeah. But something about it is interesting in the sense that, the people are different, the work ethics is different, and so, I studied anthropology, then worked in environmental consultancy. I've always been like an environmentalist since very early.
Oh, that's amazing.
Then I went to London to study my master's, did more anthropology and development there, and came back.
Which university?
London School of Economics.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you graduated in London?
My master's.
Oh, you did your master's in London.
Yeah. So undergrad here at PUC.
Oh.
Yeah, at the university down the
PUC.
road.
Yeah. I've seen there.
And then London School of Economics for 1 year, and then I came back, started to work at an NGO. Before I was doing consultancy, so I was working in the private sector. But I came back and I just saw that the private sector, while I worked in consultancy, was doing too much work for the private sector itself and not necessarily for the benefit of the communities and the environment themselves.
Yeah.
So I then started to work at an NGO, Instituto de Estudos da Religião. It's an Institute of Religious Studies, which was the first NGO that was founded here in Brazil.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
In the middle of military dictatorship in 1970. There was a lot of repression on social movements and all that, but because the university was doing religious studies, they allowed it to open. It was very academic oriented, so many anthropologists studying about the impact of the church, which was the prevalent religious institution in Brazil, effects of the church, social work of the church in Brazil, they used the funding that they got from international organizations to do whatever they wanted that they weren't able to do in universities. So because there was a lot of repression on the themes.
So it's like the church kind of became like a voice.
Exactly. So that was basically the cradle of many other social organizations in Brazil. That institution gave rise to many others. Many others that worked in the interface of very challenging topics, like in the 80s, urban violence, and then in the 90s, AIDS. So they gathered religious leaders to sit with, people who were affected by the AIDS epidemic, and then transvestites and prostitutes, all of very, I would say, kind of taboo topics at that time came to the civil society movement thanks to this organization.
Oh,
so
that's
I was very lucky to join them. And also the environment theme also was very important, especially starting in the 1990s when there was a big conference here, United Nations Conference on Environment, Development and Environment. The Rio 92 conference is a big event here, international event that happened, where they organized the first religious leaders gathering for the care of the planet. So there was a vigil at night in the Aterro.
Wow.
It's an iconic moment.
Yeah.
Where like Dalai Lama, the Pope, like hundreds of different religious leaders gathered.
You seem to be like an interesting person. You have a touch on the way you talk. You like have a touch on the society like a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's really amazing to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, after I left ISE, I started teaching at the university at PUC. I was teaching sociology there for a while, another class about sustainable development.
Okay.
And then I was invited to teach at EARJ, where I've been since then. And in the middle of the path, I had my son, who's now 11.
Oh, that's amazing. That's cool. Yeah.
While I was doing my PhD too, which was at PUC.
Tell me about your life. I know you said you grew up in Sao Paulo, and then you moved to Rio. How was the transition like?
I don't remember, so I was a baby. I do know that my mom tells the story, so maybe it's one of the stories, but it wasn't the story that I had thought about. But my mom tells the story that when we first arrived, I was 11 months old, and I had like fever for 10 days in a row, and the doctor said, no, it's just Rio is too stimulant. There's too much stimulus. There's too much color and forest, and we were living in Urca, like the most beautiful place, and the view. And São Paulo is very gray, as you're gonna see. And he's like, she's just undergoing stress because of too much stimulus, visual, even like sensory, smell, and all that. So leave her in a dark room for 10 days, and she will be all right.
Oh. Okay, that's interesting. I've never heard anything like that.
And that's how I got used to Rio.
So did your mom leave you in a dark room for 10 days?
I think so. That's what she says. Soon enough, I had no fever anymore.
That's a good advice to give to parents. That's one way to transition from city to city.
Yeah, so that's my only memory of the transition trauma, let's say. But so basically am a Carioca, but I have some, I think it's a pride to have been born in São Paulo, and then also there's my relationship with my dad is very different, because I have my parents were divorced when I was 3, got divorced when I was 3. And so my relationship with my dad has always been very distant. Up until when I was like 18 or so. I didn't see him much. And ironically, or funnily, I remembered, like, when I first read the questions, like, what story do you remember the most? I remember the story, the bedtime story that he told me when I was putting me to bed, which was very few times in my lifetime.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's interesting. And how old were you ish?
I mean, starting from the time that he put me in bed, that was probably 5, because they got divorced. I probably didn't see him for a long time, and then when I was 5, I started to go to his house.
And you still have the memories.
And I still have, and it was always the same story. And since very early on, I kept thinking to myself, is this the story? Maybe the story that his dad told him. And I never met my grandfather, so. Because that's yet another interesting story that I would like to share. But the story is a very simple bedtime tale that I don't think I don't know until this day whether he made it up or if he learned it from his dad. But it's just like once upon a time there was a little frog, and the little frog lived in a forest.
Okay.
And he woke up one day, and he was strolling around or jumping around, and then he started to hear a noise, and then he realized the noise was coming from his stomach.
Oh, okay.
And then it was his stomach growling and saying, and he's like, "Oh, I'm hungry. I need food. I'm thirsty. I need water."
So
And
and
then-
then a way of communication. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he goes and the frog eats the shadow of a tree. So I think this story kind of transposed me to the forest, which I didn't really have in my day-to-day life in the city. And then he wakes up, and then he hears the stomach growling again, and then it starts all over again, and it's the life of the frog. And then I fell asleep. I fall asleep every time, very easily.
So that was a story to put you to bed. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, that's
And very efficient.
cool. That's nice. Yeah. Wonderful.
And I think that it was, as I was saying before, a way to connect me with this countryside element and understand more of my dad's upbringing, because he is from the interior of São Paulo. He lived in a farm for most of his life, and he had to flee from that place basically after some very tragic occurrences happened with his dad in the city. I don't know if you want me to share or
you can. You're free to share as long as you want to share.
Yeah.
You're free to share.
So it's a very, I would say, iconic story from a cultural standpoint, because it says a lot about the time. Okay, so my dad was born in 1935. So between wars, and in the
World War.
it was pre World War II. The World War II broke out when he was 4. But he was in the interior of São Paulo, living like a very, very tiny village. Nowadays, it probably has 100,000 people living, but back in his days, probably 20,000 the most.
Like
A small town. A small town. And he had, the family had farms and land, so he spent most of his life in the farm. And my grandfather, he had been from what's it called, the arm, like he was a horseback riding, like in the military. I don't know the name, how you say it in English, cavalry. I don't know, like
I don't know the word.
yeah. So he was a man that valued honor, the matter of like honor and nationhood really deeply. And the other day I was speaking with my dad about the topics that I teach in class. It's like, oh, I'm talking about the interwar periods. Oh, interwar periods. That's when your grandfather got his gun. And the story of the rifle will be a very significant one in the turnout of events in my family. So he was from the countryside, and he'd lived there, and I think that intended to have a life there in the countryside for a long time, and as a child and as a young person. My grandmother was a school teacher, then she became school director, public school there in the region. Yeah, exactly, it does. And she also owned 2 bakeries, as she inherited the Italian from her Italian parents, the bread making.
I think Italy has one of the most most amazing breads.
Exactly, exactly. So she got the recipes from her parents, and she opened, and she was considered a woman entrepreneur at that time, which was very rare for women to be working and independent. So there's a value there that I really cherish from my grandmother. My grandmother I did meet. And perhaps she is a very strong female figure for me, and somebody who I look up to a lot.
That's amazing.
So my dad was born in the interior of São Paulo to a traditional family from the interior of São Paulo. And he lived in the farm for a long time, and spent most of his time doing rural activities. So I remember him telling me stories about how he bred bees and pigs, and his life in the farm. My grandfather, he was from the military, and in this period, this decade, in the 1930s here in Brazil, we had not a military, a dictatorship by Getúlio Vargas for 15 years, from 1930 to 1945. And it was a time where, of course, worldwide, there was a lot of, let's say, celebration of the nationhood, right? The idea of nationalism was at its peak, let's say.
It's kind of like almost not independence, but independence-ish feel.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
because we want to consolidate what it means to be Brazil, right? The idea of nationhood was very prevalent at that time. And my dad, being in the military, my granddad, and then he taught my dad this kind of value. And well, it was in that decade that my dad says that my grandfather got a rifle from being part of the military, and it was right in this period that he got this rifle that will be very important in the story of the family. Some years later. So my dad, up until he was 19, he finished, my grandmother was a teacher and school director, and also the owner of 2 bakeries, as she inherited her recipes from her parents, who were Italian. And came as migrant workers to Brazil. That was a time also where, there was a national policy of bringing Europeans to work in the land here. And many Italians went to live in the countryside of São Paulo. When my dad was 18 years old, more or less, he had 3 sisters who were older than him from my grandfather's first marriage. But the 3 sisters were deaf, and they wouldn't talk because their mother took barbiturates, which were medications to prevent getting pregnant.
So they affected
and they affected the development of the babies. And my 3 aunts, they were deaf. I met 2 of them. They lived pretty good lives, but they had this impairment. Yeah, and but there was one of them who my dad says, oops, did I affect this?
No, it's okay. I got it.
So my dad always says that Sylvia was my grandfather's favorite daughter. Very pretty, and she started as she was like young, maybe in her late teens. She started to go out and date, but dating at that time was very different than dating nowadays. It was going footing around footing is what they called like walking around the square, and it was men walking in one direction and women walking in another direction. And if they would exchange their eye contact, that would be they're dating.
Was it like a mostly a Brazilian culture, or
Where did the
I
culture
think I have told this story to some friends who are, I don't know, Americans, and this idea of footing, especially because in Brazil, we use the word footing. So it's an American word, so to foot. Right,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I
go
think
around
it's an
the club,
American kind of thing,
Okay,
you
yeah.
know? So basically, that was, dating. And my aunt started to date as a young woman this man who was divorced, American, and a
not-
lawyer, like older than her, divorced and American.
Was that the standards of dating for her?
I
Or-
think so. I
Okay,
think it
right.
was her beginning of, womanhood, let's say. And my grandfather was like pure anger, like when he got to know that she would be dating this guy. And he was like, this divorced, which was a scandal. Although my grandfather was divorced, but, for his girl to be going out with a divorce.
First person is a bigger.
Yeah, exactly. But and anyway, so his values were hurt, and he prohibited her to go out with this man who was a lawyer. They refer to him as Dr. Black, and I don't know I think that was his name because I read the papers, the legal papers that will come out of this story, and I think his surname was Black. And so then he prohibited. My aunt said that she had finished everything with him and broken up. But one day, it's interior of the town, small town, everybody knows everyone, and somebody screams, and they lived in a 2-story building. Somebody screams to the second floor, "Oh, she's there doing footing with Dr. Black again." And he went very angry, furious, with his rifle to the square.
The rifle that he got from the government, yeah.
The rifle that he got from the military, yes. And Dr. Black, when he saw him, hid behind the tree, a palm tree that's still there until this day. But my grandfather managed to shoot him in the leg. And yes, and for that he went to jail. Dr. Black was a lawyer, so he was very agile in taking my grandfather to jail, and understandably so, right? For attempt to homicide, to kill somebody, right? So while he was in jail, and he spent a few months in jail, and he tried killing himself 3 times, my grandfather. He already had some psychological issues. I mean, he was addicted to gambling.
He had like a mental depression.
He probably had some sort of depression. My grandmother was the owner of the bakeries, and she would leave the bakeries under his command when she went to work at the school in the afternoon. And my grandfather, he used to spend all of her money, all of the bakery's money, in the gambling, right? So he had issues. They finally, his lawyers were finally able to release him by saying that he was a very, very good shooter, and that if he had the intent to kill the guy, he wouldn't have shot his leg.
So he was like a trained shooter.
He was very good, yeah.
Okay.
So he went home, but
he didn't get like a sentence.
He
kind of won the case, or
yes, I think that he was sentenced, and then they kind of redid the, I don't know, appealed, exactly, and then he was released. But that night, so it was the very first night where he'd gone back home from jail. That very night, somebody walked again on that street and said, the Dr. Black is going to appeal again, right? And that night he got the same rifle, which he had already cut. So it was a long rifle. My dad, he talks a lot about this gun. Because he often saw my grandfather cleaning it and, kind of participated in a distance. I think that he helped my grandfather clean the rifle, which probably feels for him with a lot of guilt, in a way, because which he had ordered to be cut. So he had already planned what he was going to do, right? Because you can't kill yourself with a big rifle, right? So he cut part of the...
So he made it shorter.
He made it shorter.
Wow.
Terrible, no? And that was the story that led to my dad and my grandmother having to go to São Paulo, the city, because my grandmother was left with no money. My father was 19. He had just graduated from school. And they had to find a living, my aunts were already adults and grown up. So then they went to the city, and my dad started to work in a shop that sold appliances, like like toasters and things to clean the floor, electric equipment that were available at that time.
So your grandfather's death kind of like distorted everything.
Yeah.
So everybody had to go work for start working out.
Yeah. And my dad ended up not doing. He had started law school, but he didn't finish it because he had to work. So very soon he was luckily hired by a big company, like a big what's it called? It's a metal company. That was a big metal company, and he basically grew his career in that company. He started as a sales guy, and then he became the commercial director in that company.
Your grandmother stayed behind?
Yeah, my grandmother stayed in São Paulo for the rest of the time, and she's always been, for me, a very, transmitted the image of a very independent woman, like very ahead of her time, and having lived through such an experience, very tough, but she enjoyed life to the fullest. She traveled a lot. She loved to travel, and she traveled on her own, which is also very atypical for a woman in, let's say, the 70s, 80s, eventually when she started doing that. So, yeah, I think that I have values from that time. But what always struck me was this idea of honor, right? Like, he killed himself. Of course, he had an issue, like a psychological issue, but the claim was that it was out of honor. He wouldn't accept that relationship, right? The control over the woman because of the guy being an American or the guy being divorced. Like this level of violence that affects so many women until this day, right? And for me, having lived this so close in my family, I think is always put me to challenge it every time I see it. So, misogyny and chauvinism for me is like, ooh, I can't handle it,
That brings me to a question, how was your life growing up in Brazil as a woman? How?
It's tough. I mean,
there's been a lot of I say gender violence and gender biasness.
Yes.
All that,
So I unfortunately I indirectly lived a lot of violence, the gender violence. From very young, because I try to understand where my dad comes from and his upbringing and the kind of life and values that were taught to him. But he is a very violent person too. And
that's your dad?
Yes, my father. So my dad and my mom, they got married. It was the second marriage for both of them. My mom had already 2 kids, and my dad had one. So my dad's brother is 18 years older than I am, and my siblings from my mom's side is my Leticia is 7 years older, and my other brother is 5 years older. So I have very much older siblings, right? And it was fruit of a tremendous heartbreak that led my mother to get a divorce from her first husband, who had already basically another relationship in another country, and like left her alone with 2 kids. Classic story. So that was one part of it that, like, oh my goodness, how can a man do that? Like my brother was a baby when he was, traveling to work, but actually had the Peruvian girlfriend, And my mom evidently was very heartbroken, and then she met my dad, who was some 9 years older than she was. And my dad was, illusioned by her voice, because my mom did a lot of singing. She was like in bossa nova groups and all that. Yes, and he kind of promised to take care of the family, like, and incorporate the kids along, and that was a relationship that lasted for a while. But again, when I was born, I was 3. They got divorced, and then my dad had a health issue when I was around 8, and my dad and my mom hadn't been in a relationship between through this time. But my dad had a brain stroke while he was working, flying everywhere, and he basically was like he couldn't move, and for a while, and he was in bed, and he had nobody to take care of him. And he went back to my mom's place, and where I lived too. So I have memories of me being 8 years old and him moving in again. And I really didn't understand, but it was my dad, and he'd come back home, right? And he spent most of the time in the bathroom, and whenever I visited, sometimes he was like hallucinating because he was taking a lot of medication. So sometimes like, oh, a bunch of ants climbing up the wall, or I'm catching fire, like these kinds of hallucinations. Very strong.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So when your grandfather, you said your grandfather shot at Mr. Black, was it, did anybody find out the reason why he did that? Was it because of protecting?
I think that it was kind of understood by that cultural group that he was doing something to protect his honor. And that was actually...
It was his honor, not the...
It was his honor. It was the honor of the family, right? And that is actually in the legal papers, because my dad has all of the papers, the trial, the everything. And it was legitimate to defend your honor. At that time, according to Brazilian legislation, you could use that as
in defense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
That's
very curious times, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting.
You could
to hear
kill somebody to defend the honor.
the honor.
Yeah. So
It's
it's
not
a legitimate
self-defense
defense of honor.
Wow.
That's the name of the claim, you know.
That's cool. And the guy was like from the US, came to work to Brazil, or was he like having a parents who were American but grew up in Brazil, or you?
No, I think he was in. Yeah, I don't know much of that story, but I think he was American and had come to Brazil for some reason, maybe work. So that's how they met, you know. And in the interiors, I suppose it's a city that used to have a lot of factories for shoe factories and all that. So I suppose he went to And I think it was a temporary kind of, he wasn't here forever, and he hadn't proposed to my aunt. It was like a fling, let's say. But going to trying to answer your question about the gender violence, during this period when my dad went back home and was recovering from the stroke, and it was only like more than 20 years later that I learned about this. I know, and I remember of my dad and my mom having a lot of conflict and having like verbal violence, towards each other, because their room was right next to mine, and I mean the door was always closed at these times. So I'd always had this in my head, but when I was 30-ish, my mom said, actually, there was one day that your dad almost killed me from beating. And he almost broke every bone of my body, and hit me even more when I said I was going to call the police.
Wow. Yeah.
So that
Must have
for
been so
me,
difficult to live with, yeah.
and
And
yeah, so
and
this was tough.
yeah, it's something that most women go through, and they don't have like a voice to speak up.
Exactly.
Because of some reason, they think that it might affect their. I mean, the relationship is already affected, but it's like fear
Exactly.
embedded into them. Like
Exactly.
nobody's gonna help, and they have to live through that.
Yeah, and imagine my mom held it with her, this story, for
For however
so many
years,
years, and until this day, whenever the topic comes up, she's like, I don't think it was a good idea to have told you.
That's a
She wanted to have
strong-
she wanted to have protected me from it, but at the same time, I think, I mean, I'm sure she understands that we need to break
Yeah.
the pattern. And I think that she told me because for many years, for most of my life, I would say, and until this day, I felt a lot of guilt from not responding to my father's affection as much as I think I should, and or being there, because then eventually, after many years, he retired and he went to live in the interior of São Paulo again. He went back to his origins. And I mean, it's been years that I haven't seen him. Today in the morning, I spoke with him. We speak on the phone, but I do carry a guilt of like, I've always done a lot of effort to be with him and I think that I was in one of these moments that's like, oh, but I have to go see him, I have to love him, and my mom is like, why do you make so much effort? It's like, maybe he is not doing so much effort. So I mean,
Yeah, what I always know, I might be wrong with this, but like parental love, it's not supposed to be, but also supposed to be more than like kids love, because most of the time I see parents loving their kids more than kids loving their parents. I mean, they do love each other a lot, but I see most parents showing that much affection to their children. But you say that in your case it's different. Like
Yeah.
you are the one who's
Yes.
going to look for the love.
yes, of course that there's different ways, and I do appreciate that he was the kind of father that he was financially, he was present. So he did his job by paying, school and, providing, the provider. But that wasn't enough, I mean, the hole that it left, especially because there was also that's all compounded by the violence, So anyway, I mean, this is the story, and it's a part of the story, right? It's like
It's it's really good to hear from you. Actually, it's kind of like enlightening as well, and I hope our people will get inspiration from your story as well. And
Thank you.
Yeah, the more we tell stories, the more people's lives change. You can reflect your life on what you're not actually doing, like being present for your family, which, as you said, kind of covers the bigger hole that people don't see. Yeah. So I hope our viewers will have like a deeper, an inner
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for listening.
And I really appreciate you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
That means a lot.
It means
Yeah.
a lot to me to be able to tell, and because every time I say it, I process it a little, and of course, it's an ongoing process and probably never ending, right? With many lessons. Thank you.
You very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is my story.
My father. My father told me stories slow. Jazz in the car, skylines aglow. Rushing through metal and time. Lion King lights, rhythm and rhyme. Memories a map, stories aflame. Truth in our voice, not just our name. Silence breaks when we speak it aloud. Stories are sacred, soft and proud. Roots reclaim, voices rise. Spirit and land, sea and skies. Medicine made in every line. Story heals one breath at a time. Hold it with care, speak it with love. Let it guide us forward. Hold it with care and speak it with love. Let it guide us forward.
This is my story. My story. This